Tacoma Bridge collapse. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge in Washington opened in July 1940 as the third longest suspension bridge in the world. But it had a fatal design flaw. Engineers built it to be thin and flexible, saving money on materials, while underestimating the effect of wind resonance. Suspension bridges naturally oscillate, but Tacoma's narrow deck and shallow girders amplified the motion. Even in light breezes, the bridge earned the nickname Galloping Gertie because the roadway visibly undulated. On November 7th, just 4 months after opening, a steady 40 miles per hour wind triggered aeroelastic flutter, a twisting motion that grows instead of dampening out. Within hours, the oscillations tore the suspension cables, fractured the deck, and brought down the 2,800-foot main span. The collapse cost about $6 million at the time, approximately $100 million today, and insurance companies refused to cover it. More importantly, it revolutionized bridge engineering. Wind tunnel testing, aerodynamic deck designs, and stiffening trusses became mandatory for long-span bridges worldwide. The Tacoma disaster is now taught in engineering programs as a landmark case in structural dynamics, proof that ignoring aerodynamics in design can destroy even the most ambitious projects. 3 Mile Island partial meltdown. On March 28, 1979, the Unit 2 reactor at the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant in Pennsylvania suffered the worst accident in U.S. commercial nuclear history. The chain of failure began with a stuck open relief valve, which allowed coolant to escape. Operators, misreading the instruments, shut down the emergency water pumps that could have stabilized the reactor. As a result, the core overheated. About half of the reactor fuel melted, though the containment vessel prevented a full-scale disaster. Radioactive gases were released into the atmosphere, but in small amounts compared to later events like Chernobyl. The economic impact, however, was massive. Cleanup took 14 years and cost over $1 billion, with the reactor permanently destroyed. Beyond direct costs, the accident halted new nuclear plant construction in the U.S. for decades, reshaping the nation's entire energy policy. 3 Mile Island became a textbook example of human error compounded by poor system design. Instruments failed to display the true valve position, training didn't cover the scenario, and the safety culture proved inadequate. It's now studied worldwide as a case in how small misjudgments and complex systems can escalate into billion-dollar failures. The Costa Concordia sinking. On January 13, 2012, the Italian cruise ship Costa Concordia struck rocks off the coast of Tuscany after Captain Francesco Schettino steered dangerously close to shore in an unscheduled maneuver known as a salute. The impact tore a 160-foot gash in the hull, flooding compartments and knocking out power. The 114,000-ton vessel, carrying more than 4,200 passengers and crew, capsized within hours and came to rest on its side in shallow water. 32 people died, and the disaster instantly became one of the most expensive maritime accidents in history. Salvage operations were unprecedented. Engineers refloated the 950-foot ship using massive steel platforms and airbags in what was, at the time, the largest ship recovery project ever attempted. The entire process took over 2 years and cost an estimated $2 billion, including compensation, environmental cleanup, and scrapping. The Costa Concordia tragedy exposed systemic issues in maritime safety, poor evacuation procedures, lack of crew training, and the consequences of reckless command decisions. Today, it stands as a case study in how one individual's error can trigger a multi-billion-dollar engineering nightmare. Halifax explosion. On December 6, 1917, Halifax, Nova Scotia, became the site of the largest man-made explosion before the atomic bomb. The French cargo ship Mont Blanc, loaded with 2,900 tons of explosives, TNT, picric acid, and benzol, collided with another vessel in the harbor after pilot error during navigation. The impact ignited a fire that burned for 20 minutes before the cargo detonated. The resulting blast released energy equivalent to about 3 kilotons of TNT. Nearly half of Halifax was leveled. A shockwave shattered windows 50 miles away, and the mushroom cloud rose more than a mile into the sky. Over 1,900 people were killed, 9,000 injured, and 25,000 left homeless. Entire districts were flattened, and ships in the harbor were tossed onto shore. The financial damage is estimated at $2 to $3 billion in today's terms, not including the long-term costs of rebuilding the city. The Halifax explosion reshaped urban disaster planning, emergency medicine, and international shipping safety. It remains a reminder of how a single navigational mistake, combined with dangerous cargo, can devastate an entire city in seconds. Challenger shuttle disaster. On January 28, 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger broke apart just 73 seconds after liftoff, killing all 7 crew members on board. The cause was traced to O-ring seals in the solid rocket boosters that failed in unusually cold weather. Engineers at contractor Morton Thiokol had warned NASA that the O-rings were unsafe at low temperatures, but management pressed ahead with the launch. When the shuttle lifted off in near-freezing conditions, the seals lost flexibility, allowing hot gases to escape and breach the external fuel tank. The resulting explosion destroyed the shuttle, scattering debris over the Atlantic. The financial cost of losing the orbiter was about $3.2 billion, but the impact went far beyond money. The accident grounded NASA's shuttle program for nearly 3 years, delayed major projects, and shook public confidence in U.S. space exploration. Most importantly, it exposed flaws in NASA's decision-making culture, where schedule and public image sometimes outweighed engineering concerns. The Challenger disaster is now studied as a landmark case in organizational failure, showing how ignoring technical warnings can have catastrophic and enormously costly consequences. Air France Flight 447. On June 1, 2009, Air France Flight 447 disappeared over the Atlantic while en route from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. The Airbus A330 entered a storm zone where pitot tubes, sensors that measure airspeed, iced over and began sending faulty data. Autopilot disconnected, leaving the pilots to handfly in heavy turbulence. Instead of stabilizing, they made critical errors, pulling the nose up and holding it there. The aircraft stalled at high altitude, losing lift and beginning a fatal descent. For over 4 minutes, alarms blared as the plane fell from 38,000 feet, striking the ocean at over 100 knots vertically. All 228 passengers and crew were killed. The financial cost of insurance payouts, lawsuits, and compensation reached an estimated $4 to $5 billion, making it one of the costliest aviation accidents in history. Beyond money, it exposed systemic issues in pilot training. Many had never practiced high-altitude stalls, and raised questions about automation dependence in modern cockpits. Flight 447 is now a case study in aviation safety, showing how sensor failure, human error, and over-reliance on technology can combine into a multi-billion-dollar tragedy. Exxon Valdez oil spill. On March 24, 1989, the oil tanker Exxon Valdez struck Bligh Reef in Alaska's Prince William Sound after Captain Joseph Hazelwood left the bridge to an unlicensed officer. The ship tore open its hull, releasing 11 million gallons of crude oil into pristine Arctic waters. The environmental impact was catastrophic. Oil slicks coated 1,300 miles of coastline, killing an estimated 250,000 seabirds, 2,800 sea otters, 300 seals, and countless fish. The spill devastated local communities dependent on fishing, with some ecosystems still showing contamination decades later. The cleanup effort was one of the largest ever attempted, involving thousands of workers, chemical dispersants, booms, and high-pressure hot water. Despite spending more than $2 billion on cleanup and facing billions more in damages and fines, much of the oil remained embedded in beaches and sediments. The total cost exceeded $7 billion. The Exxon Valdez disaster reshaped U.S. environmental policy. It led to the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, mandating double-hulled tankers and stricter oversight of shipping. It remains a landmark case of how a single lapse in judgment on the bridge can trigger one of the most expensive environmental disasters in history. Bhopal gas leak. On the night of December 2, 1984, at the Union Carbide pesticide plant in Bhopal, India, a maintenance error triggered the release of 40 tons of methyl isocyanate gas. The toxic cloud spread silently over the sleeping city. By morning, thousands were dead and hundreds of thousands more were permanently injured. The gas caused blindness, respiratory failure, and neurological damage. Entire families were wiped out in a single night, and survivors suffered chronic illnesses that persisted for decades. Estimates put the immediate death toll at 3,000, but long-term effects raised that figure to 15,000 to 20,000. Nearly 500,000 people were exposed. The economic fallout was staggering. Beyond medical costs and lost productivity, environmental contamination left the site toxic for generations. Analysts place the total damages at over $10 billion, making it one of the costliest industrial disasters in history. Bhopal remains a case study in corporate negligence and poor safety standards. It reshaped global awareness of chemical plant safety, leading to stricter international regulations. Yet for many in Bhopal, the disaster is not history. It's an ongoing reality written into their soil, water, and health. Ever Given blocking the Suez. In March 2021, the Ever Given, one of the largest container ships ever built, became lodged sideways in the Suez Canal after a steering error during high winds. For nearly a week, the 1,300-foot vessel blocked one of the world's most critical trade arteries. The Suez Canal handles about 12% of all global trade, moving oil, yapped consumer goods, and raw materials between Europe and Asia. With the Ever Given stuck, hundreds of ships piled up at both ends, forcing many to reroute thousands of miles around Africa's Cape of Good Hope. The economic fallout was staggering. staggering. Analysts estimate the blockade delayed or disrupted more than $60 billion worth of global trade, while Egypt alone lost millions of dollars per day in canal tolls. The incident also exposed the vulnerability of global supply chains, where a single failure point can cascade into worldwide shortages and delays. The Ever Given was eventually freed after a massive salvage operation, but the image of a lone bulldozer dwarfed by the ship's hull became a lasting symbol of just how fragile modern commerce really is. Deepwater Horizon explosion. On April 20th, 2010, BP's Deepwater Horizon drilling rig suffered a catastrophic blowout in the Gulf of Mexico. Investigations later showed that safety shortcuts and rushed drilling practices allowed high-pressure methane gas to surge up the well, igniting an explosion that killed 11 workers and sank the rig. What followed was the largest marine oil spill in history. For 87 days, crude gushed unchecked into the Gulf, ultimately releasing more than 200 million gallons. The disaster devastated ecosystems, contaminating marshes, killing marine life, and crippling fisheries and tourism across multiple states. Economically, the consequences were historic. BP alone paid $65 billion in cleanup, damages, and legal settlements, while the long-term environmental cost remains incalculable. The spill also prompted sweeping reforms in offshore drilling regulations and highlighted the extreme risks of deepwater oil extraction. The Deepwater Horizon wasn't just an industrial accident, it became a case study in how cost-cutting and oversight failures can trigger one of the most expensive man-made disasters in history. Chernobyl reactor meltdown. On April 26, 1986, a late-night safety test at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine spiraled out of control. Operators disabled key safety systems, and under the supervision of Deputy Chief Engineer Anatoly Dyatlov, an unstable reactor design combined with human error caused Reactor 4 to explode. The blast released a radioactive cloud that spread across much of Europe. Entire towns were evacuated, and a permanent 30-kilometer exclusion zone was created. The accident exposed tens of thousands to radiation, caused immediate deaths among workers and firefighters, and led to long-term health effects including cancers and birth defects. Economically, the disaster has been called the most expensive man-made accident in history. Costs tied to containment, cleanup, relocation, and health damages are estimated at over $200 billion. The ruined reactor was encased in a massive sarcophagus, later replaced by the new safe confinement structure, an engineering project alone costing $2 billion. Chernobyl revealed the catastrophic potential of nuclear power when mismanaged, reshaping global nuclear policy and leaving behind a scar that will remain radioactive for thousands of years. Fukushima Daiichi meltdown. On March 11, 2011, a 9.0 magnitude earthquake struck off Japan's coast, unleashing a massive tsunami. While the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant had seawalls in place, they were built too low. The waves surged over, flooding backup generators that powered the plant's cooling systems. Without cooling, 3 reactors overheated and suffered core meltdowns, releasing radioactive material into the air and Pacific Ocean. More than 150,000 residents were evacuated, many never to return. The cleanup is expected to take decades, involving the removal of melted fuel, contaminated water, and soil. Economically, Fukushima is considered the most expensive nuclear disaster in history, with costs estimated at $200 to $250 billion. Beyond finances, it reignited global debate over the safety of nuclear power, prompting countries like Germany to accelerate their nuclear phase-out. The Fukushima crisis showed how a single overlooked detail, in this case seawall height, can cascade into one of the costliest technological failures ever recorded.